My mic up. Let's try that again. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, good whatever time it is, wherever you are, whoever you are. Happy Pi Day, and welcome once again, as he turns on his lights, to No Nerd Caliber, the show in which we go over a list of usually something that we like, or maybe in this case, something that we don't like so much, about things related to nerddom, nerdy entertainment, and so on. I'm Rodney Brown. I'm the editor-in-chief of Nerd Caliber, first-person shooter on Facebook, as a cosplay photographer, burly_adopter on Twitter, a couple of other places, doing a few other things. And tonight's topic is our least favorite time travel stories from any entertainment media. Books, movies, TV shows, streaming shows, anime, comic books, whatever. And the reason we do that, as we do with almost all of these shows, is we tie it into our upcoming Full Fat Spoiler Chat on Thursdays. This Thursday's Full Fat Spoiler Chat is about the recent Netflix movie, The Adam Project, which dropped just this last Friday. Ryan Reynolds, Zoe Saldana, so on, Mark Ruffalo, Jennifer Garner, etc. And we'll be talking about that in a show called Spoiler Chat, so it will be full of spoilers on Thursday at 8 o'clock. And that's why we often tie the subjects of this show to the Spoiler Chats, and that's why this one is about time travel we don't like. Luminous, welcome to the show. I already had one goof, which luckily you guys didn't notice because I caught it with 1 minute to go in the show. In that we're using we're trying out at least, a new streaming service to multiple platforms. And of course, whenever you do something brand new, you make mistakes. So I made that mistake, but I made it early enough that I was able to correct it. But I can't guarantee that I won't make any more going further. Right now, it should operate just like the last service, or I should say the current service that we normally use operates. But hey, weird things happen on the internet. So, let me get right into it. Well, you know what? First, I'm actually going to, because I keep forgetting these, even though I pushed them all the way to the end. But I'm going to start promoting, speaking of Twitch, our Twitch channel. If you have a Twitch account, I'd love to have you go to that URL that's on your screen, twitch.tv/nerdcaliber, and think about possibly following us there. We'd love to have you. We'd love to build our viewership on Twitch, like we have pretty extensive on Facebook and broadly extensive on YouTube. So please do, twitch.tv/nerdcaliber. All right. Since I am flying solo tonight, instead of 3, which is what we normally do, or 3 with an honorable mention, I've got 5. Ivan on Facebook says, that should be the name of your show. Weird things happen on the internet. That would apply to all of our live shows. The problem is then, people wouldn't really know what they're tuning in for. But that could be the subtitle for all of our shows, or the general title for all of our live media stuff. Weird things happen on the internet. No Nerd Caliber, top. Yeah, not to be too long. But we'll think about it. So, this is going to go, these 5, I have 5 because I'm flying solo. These 5 are going to go in order of least favorite. Kind of a double negative, I guess. Order of least hated. Might be a better way to put it. So, number 5, therefore the best in the list, is Star Trek Generations. And the reason it's at number 5 and not higher on the list is overall, it's actually a pretty decent movie. It's definitely not the best of either the original cast block of movies or the Next Generation cast block of movies, but it's not the worst of either of those either. Star Trek 5. But the time travel aspect of it is literally, maybe not literally, but certainly seems to be tacked on just so they can do this thing they really wanted to do, which was have Kirk hand over the movie franchises to Picard. So, the movie starts 78 years before Picard's time of this movie, when the what's left of the command structure of the original Enterprise crew, or not the original, the Kirk era Enterprise crew, is looking at the commissioning of the Enterprise 1701B. As Ivan said, I'll get to the Nexus, but it says that is some pretty sloppy time travel, and the Nexus makes no sense internally or externally. So, Kirk, at the end of this thing, something goes wrong. Kirk disappears. Everybody assumes he's dead. Jump forward 78 years. Picard and that version of the Enterprise runs across Soren, who is this scientist, researcher, weird guy. It's killing me. How can I not remember who played Soren? I know who played him. I mean, I can't remember his name. Malcolm McDowell. Wow. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to get into this thing that he has discovered which he calls the Nexus. And it is essentially a pocket dimension, although they don't use that. It's a place that exists outside of normal space and time. And guess what? Kirk has been trapped in this thing for the last 78 years. Something about the Nexus makes you, I guess, live a fantasy life where you think whatever your fantasy of life would be really is, and which implies that the Nexus has some sort of sentience. It's able to, an energy warp, is able to somehow detect what it is that you want. Anyway, that whole Nexus thing is there so that Kirk can come forward into Picard and Soren's timeline and help Picard stop Soren before, blowing up the Nexus and destroying the universe or whatever. Anyway, it's dumb time travel. It's one of the most absolutely blatant, let's stick this concept in here just so we can make these two characters meet and literally hand the baton. Well, not literally. There are no batons as far as I know. So it's just, that part of it is really stupid. The fight at the end in which Kirk and Picard fight against Soren, you've got gentlemen in their 60s at best. This is back in 2003, mind you. Luminous. Yes, the TNG episode Yesterday's Enterprise should have been a movie instead of the story. Absolutely. They should have made a movie level version of the City on the Edge of Forever. The fantastic original cast story of Kirk and Spock going back and discovering that if they get involved in something, maybe Nazis happen. So it's just terrible, folks. That part of it is terrible. Again, if it was just a story about Picard and the Enterprise crew of his era fighting against a nutjob who's trying to blow up some sort of energy, rift that might destroy the universe, with an amazing, cast, obviously Malcolm McDowell, then yeah, that'd be a good story. The action around that is actually pretty good. But no, it's just dumb. All right. Number 4. Robert Heinlein's novel, Time Enough for Love. So, to explain why I think this is, on the list of my least favorite time travel stories, I have to ruin the ending of it. Now, granted, this novel came out in 1973, so it is coming up on its 50th anniversary. It's like 1 year away. So yeah, if you haven't read it by now, you're probably not gonna, and I'm sorry for spoiling it, but I have to do that. It's the story of Lazarus Long, one of the many stories featuring Lazarus Long, um, an immortal character in a bunch of Heinlein's later novels. And this one is essentially a series of stories with a connecting narrative story that goes around it. Um, but they ultimately end with Lazarus has been living for well more than 1,000 years, so this takes place well more than 1,000 years in the future. Is basically sick of living, sick of having so many people he's loved die on him. So the most of the stories relate to people getting him to tell stories about his past that all help him come back to the sense of, all right, maybe I do want to live. But finally he realizes, yeah, maybe he wants to live, but not in this time. So he decides, he somehow, I can't remember how, figures out time travel and decides to travel back to when he was born, which is the early 20th century, prior to World War One. And he screws up, misses by just a couple of years, but winds up back in his hometown, sees his young mother, falls in love with her, has an affair with her. So the time travel aspect of the story, and you can't really call the fact that he's immortal a time travel. It takes place, his telling of these various tales takes place over 1,000 years, but he's not traveling from point to point. He's just remembering because he's lived that long. The time travel is near the end. He goes back, and it's literally there so Lazarus Long can go back and sleep with his mother. And when I read this, it came out in 1973, I probably didn't read it immediately, but say when I was 14 or 15, I remember, I'm a Heinlein fan, always have been. I was like, yeah, this is great. It's a little weird, but it's great. That story's a little weird, but it's really cool. And then you get to the end and go, what the? That's the payoff? Oh, I just, okay. It even, and so his mother gets pregnant. We do find out after the baby is born that apparently it is her actual husband's child. But for a while, you actually think that Lazarus Long is his own original great times X grandfather. And I'd be willing to bet dollars for donuts that Heinlein's editor Ivan, at least Futurama acknowledged the joke, and I am sure used as inspiration for the joke this story, or this novel. I'd be willing to bet that Heinlein did have it that he was his own ancestor, and then his publisher or editor finally went, yeah, look, all the rest of the stories in here are essentially examinations or critiques of the idea that incest is 100% bad. And that is true. I didn't realize that. Never even occurred to me when I was reading it back when I was a teenager, until I was looking it up here, and it was like, oh wow, oh wow. And then I get down to themes. It's like, yeah, the themes are all these, it's about incest and how it's, often not bad. I'm like, okay. So it's a time travel story, a novel that's all about incest, where the main character goes back and sleeps with his mom. All right, that's enough of that. It's number 4 and not higher because it's Heinlein. It is, again, brilliant. As reviewers said at the time, there are more wonderful science fiction ideas in this one novel than most writers put in their entire career. Ivan, just remember, Time Rider did that too. Time Rider? All right, you're going to have to fill me in on that one, Ivan. Is that like Kamen Rider, but with time machines instead of motorcycles? Anyway, please do let me know what Time Rider is. So I'm a big fan of Heinlein's work. I'm a big fan of a lot of the stuff that's in here, until you get to the big realization. And it's like, I just read X number of hundreds of pages about justification of incest, and then actual, the main character does it. Alrighty. Okay, number 3 on the list. Timeline. 2003 movie starring Paul Walker and Gerard Butler, based on a Michael Crichton novel, and I have to say it's one of the Michael Crichton novels I've never read, which seems odd because it's right in my wheelhouse. Time Rider. I'm not going to click on the link, but it looks like an animated series or movie. Um, Ivan. Um, so Crichton, I've been a big fan of Michael Crichton's novels all the way back to the Andromeda Strain, and generally a fan of the adaptations of his novels into movies all the way back to the Andromeda Strain, the original one anyway, which was fantastic. If you want to see, granted, it's got still a pretty 60s vibe to it, or late 60s, early 70s vibe to it. But if you want to see, even in that vibe, a really accurate treatment of the way scientists interact and the way government interacts with scientists, and, you know, anyway, I don't want to give away too much about that because we're not talking about that. And it has nothing to do with time travel. But an awful lot of his other works I've always been a fan of. So this seems to be right up my alley. It's a science fiction story about, you know, quantum technology that allows for time travel. It's a mystery story about a professor who disappears, and it turns out they find out that he must have traveled back to the 14th century. It's a historical fiction set in medieval Europe, 14th century France. Why would this not be right up my alley? I should go read the book, because the movie is dumb. So first off, Gerard Butler continues the idea of a Scotsman trying desperately to play somebody not a Scotsman and failing. He plays Andre Marac, a Frenchman in 14th century France, who sounds as much like a Scotsman as Leonidas, the king of Sparta, sounds like a Greek in 300. So there's that. Really not bad, but not good costume, weapon, character design, so on. You know, it's not historically accurate. It looks kind of like a cheap LARP. Time Rider was a live action movie, came out in 1982. Spoiler alert, the guy banged his grandma and gave her the family heirloom he carries around. So incest and a bootstrap paradox. Had I seen that, it might have been on my list, Ivan. That sounds right in keeping with what we're talking about. So, like, they mostly hold to the big plot structure of the novel, and I know that because I've got the novel information up here. Again, I haven't read it. They did make one big change, and this is so typically Hollywood. In the movie, it's a Professor Johnston who winds up going, you know, in the back to the past, and it's a bunch of his graduate students and research assistants who go back to try to rescue him. They make one of those graduate students, Chris, his son, which is not the case in the book. Yeah, that's Paul Walker's character. Like, I get it. That gives him, you know, more incentive. But that also means, like, okay, well, these 4 people who are traveling back in time, one of them is only doing it to get their dad, and he's dragging the rest of them along, you know, to help. Anyway. So it's got, the movie has such an amazing cast around it. Aside from Butler and Walker, Billy Connolly as Professor Johnston. But then in the past, also modern times, David Thewlis and Neil McDonough. But in the past, Michael Sheen, Lambert Wilson, the Merovingian himself, Martin Chokas, and I guess that's it for the big names. A fantastic European cast for when they're in the medieval Europe setting. They don't help. You know, Michael Sheen's certainly done plenty of Dogs. Thulis, not so much. Martin Tsokas, yeah, he's done some dogs too. Anyway, it's just dumb. If it was better action, if it was more logical science fiction, I'd probably not put it on here, but it's neither of those things. So, yeah, I wouldn't waste your time unless you're some sort of Michael Crichton completionist, then sure, but otherwise it's not worth it. All right, moving on to our next topic. So our next two are anime. It's pretty easy to see why they're in the top two, because anime is, when it's bad, it's really bad. The first of these two is Mr. Nobunaga's Child Bride. Make sure I get this. That's the English translation. Young Bride, not Child Bride. Young Bride, that's better. Nobunaga Sensei no Osanazuma. So the story is, this guy with the ponytail here is Nobunaga Sensei. He's a teacher of middle school students. He is a lover of gal games, so basically romance games, but unlucky in love himself. At some point, this girl shows up, Kicho, who makes the mistake once she finds out what his name is, that he is Oda Nobunaga. She was apparently promised as a bride to Oda Nobunaga, and therefore thinks that she needs to marry this guy immediately and have his babies. And she's 14. So this is a comedy about all the fun that can be had around a time-traveling 14-year-old promised bride who wants to have babies with a middle school teacher. I don't know if it's funny. I watched the first episode and went, "You've got to be effing kidding me." And just, I'm out. I am so out. But the score on my anime list is 5.29, which is, everybody scores high on there except me. And so for something to get a 5.29 out of 10 means it's pretty crappy. It's just one of those horrible ideas. Why would anybody want to do that? I just can't see the hilarity in, let's put the situation in which a middle school teacher is trying to put off the advances of a 14-year-old girl. And then we'll have a time travel thing about it. So that makes it, all better, I guess, because she comes from a period when that sort of thing was fairly common. No. Let's just not, shall we? So I would not recommend ever watching this. It's just based on one episode, and I won't watch any more, pure garbage. But it's not the most purest of the garbage on our list. This is a pretty recent one, too. Those are the two main characters, pretty much, of the very recent anime Gibiatti. Ivan, that's rough even by bad standards. Absolutely, and boy, you haven't seen anything yet. So, Gibiatti, on paper, should have been really solid. What you have here are the two main characters. You have Sensui Kansaki, and where are we here? They don't have him right next to him. There we go. Kenroku Sanada. Sanada with the closer cropped hair. Kanzaki or Kanzuki with the crazier hair. So one of them is a samurai, and the other is a shinobi, a ninja, from the Sengoku period, and they somehow get brought forward into a dystopian future Tokyo. So it's set in 2030. A virus was somehow released that turns people who are exposed to it into these mutant bug lizard things called Gibiatti. And what type of those things they turn into is based on their sex, their age, and their race. Which is kind of weird, in that race enters into that. It's like, oh, only black people turn into this thing. Not the most horrible thing that the show is doing. So they get discovered by Kathleen Funada, who is the third primary lead in this series, a blonde woman, so half Japanese, who is a research scientist working with her mother, who is trying to figure out a cure for the Gibiatti virus, or a vaccine, or some way to stop it. Ideally, a cure to get those people who have been turned, changed back into humans. Immediately upon discovering them, and for some reason being able to understand them, and I'm not sure how much linguistic drift there has been in Japanese in the last 500 years, or 400 and something years, but probably some. She accepts the fact that they are from the past. And it turns out that's not really that stupid. Later on, you find out that she caused the event. But in the second episode, one of the first things she does, a research scientist who knows she has maybe months before all of humanity is gone, spends a couple of days redesigning their costumes and even their makeup to make them look more modern. So logic is not something that really applies to this series. The creatures are the most garbage tier CGI, or at least I would have said that prior to the existence of X-Arm, but it's right up there. It's just terrible CGI, terrible integration of CGI, and the worst thing is, this has, on paper, some of the most creative people in Japan working on it. Character designer goes all the way back to Speed Racer. Did the designs for mecha robot series like Cashern. It's just mind-boggling. The director has been a key animator, chief animation director, and I don't think has ever fully directed anything, but as a key animator, all the way back to Gurren Lagann. Yeah, just an amazing track record for these creators. The fact that the animators took the designs of somebody who is known for making some of the most beautiful Final Fantasy illustrations in the world, and creating the designs for Gatchaman. Literally created all the Gatchaman designs for the original Gatchaman series, and turned them into this. Somebody ought to be flogged. But there are other creators in here. There are the music. Some of the music is written by the most well-respected shamisen players. It's just insane. Ivan, racist viruses are all the rage of 2030, and everyone knows you can't fight a virus if you look anachronistic. That's just science. I stand corrected. You're right, Ivan. That's just science. It might be, Cthulhu Ghostbusters science. I mean, technically Arkham Ghostbusters, but we wanted to get the Cthulhu reference. But, it's still science. Sure it is. It's just, it's dumber than everything else I've mentioned here, all added up and rolled into one. It's, I told you how like 5.29 is a very bad rating on My Anime List. Gibiatti has a My Anime rating of 3.81. 3 is called very bad. So nobody likes this. Absolutely everybody hates this series. I made it, I think, until episode 5. Again, because I thought, all right, it's dumb. It's really dumb. It's dumb. The CGI is horrible. But, I like this idea of, anachronistic stories where, warriors in particular are brought forward from, nope, it just doesn't, it's not watchable. So, do not watch it. I would avoid every one of these, like the plague, even if it's not the Gibeah plague or the coronavirus or whatever else. I just still avoid them. They're terrible. I mean, Generations, sure, hold your nose during the stupid Kirk going forward into time thing and the whole Nexus thing. But it's not a bad movie around that. Time Enough for Love, again, some weird topics, but it's Heinlein at his, one is most indulgent, which is often when his most interesting writing happens, but also just so packed with Heinlein ideas. Timeline, just don't bother. It's a dumb movie. Nobunaga, stay away. And Gibiatti, burn it in a fire, please. So that's it, folks. That's our show. As I mentioned, this Thursday we will be full fat spoiler chat review of The Atom Project. So if you have not seen it and you do not like spoilers, you should probably not tune into that show, or you should try to see it. It's a movie. It's less than 2 hours. You should try to see it before then. But between then, tomorrow night, of course, we have Nerd Week Live. It was turning out to be another pretty light topic show. Light in the sense of fewer numbers of topics. But today we dropped a lot of interesting stuff. So it's going to be, I would say, an average, it's going to probably be closer to an hour than the half-hour shows we've had the last 2 weeks. And our last promo is, of course, Patreon. We do have a Patreon account. It is right there on the screen, the URL patreon.com/nerdcaliber. We'd love to have you go check it out. If you are of a mind to, maybe even become a patron. We have cons coming up, and what we do with that Patreon money is it just helps us go to more cons and get more content. So we will be at Wicked Comic Con April 9th at the Weston Waterfront in South Boston. I almost said Southie. In South Boston. We will be at PAX East the last weekend in April. And we will be running on Saturday of that last weekend our cosplay and photography shootout panel, if you'll pardon checking my voice, which we have done when these events have happened at the last few PAX Easts and New York Comic Cons and so on. It's always a lot of fun. Show up and watch cosplayers and photographers get together and run around like chickens with their heads cut off trying to create really beautiful work in a very short window. And that is 7:30 in the Arachnid Theater on Saturday at PAX East. And then, of course, in May, we've got Free Comic Book Day. And at the end of May, Anime Boston, I will finally get a chance to actually run the cosplay photography studio in the photo department at Anime Boston, which I agreed to do back in mid-fall 2019. Guess how that worked out for the last 2 years. So, finally, it's going to happen. So hopefully we'll see a whole bunch of you then. And so those are the kind of cons that we'd like to go, and other cons that we might not have had on our list because we may not have the funding. That's what Patreon money helps us do. So that said, folks, please stay safe out there. Enjoy the warming weather here in New England. I know I am. And we will see you at an upcoming show.